think it's pretty well known that they've struggled to, especially among skilled prospects, I would say that they've struggled to graduate their prospects into meaningful NHL roles. The last top six forward that they produced, their draft pick came up through their system, played regular minutes in a top six role, was Jake DeBrusk. Like that was a 2015 draft pick. He was drafted 11 years ago. That's just a long time to go without having a hit like that.
You're listening to the PuckUps podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 40 of the PuckUps podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and right now I am joined by WEEI writer and co-host of the Skate podcast, along with Bridget Prue and some other stallion who shall remain nameless. Scott, you know how tough it was for me just now to not say welcome into the Skate pod, seeing you on my screen, but thank you for joining me.
I'm like, what is this? This is in the Skate pod? Where am I? Did I get lost?
Yeah, I was texting you and Bridget. So for those wondering, Bridget's going to be on the show next week, but I was texting you both individually to come on this, and Bridget was suggesting that all three of us come on. And I was like, well, you got to keep the Skate Pod trio unique, right? Can't be ripping off the Skate Pod for my show. But Scott, thanks for being here. A lot to get into today. Long time no talk. We did talk earlier this morning. So for those who hopefully watched the Skate Pod recently, yeah, we're in the same clothes and the same outfits, but same conversation, but yet different at the same time, Scott. And I want to start off with the Boston Bruins and some of their development issues and a reputation that I'm wondering if there's some damaged reputation with the Bruins in terms of development around the league with certain players. And this conversation spawns from Andre Gasso and Oscar Jelvik, Bruins draft picks that, for one reason or the other, decided that it's not in their best interest to continue with the Boston Bruins, or maybe the Bruins felt that way about them. And so that's kind of in its own silo, but it makes me think also about other prospects with the Bruins. And we've talked about Matt Patra, Fabian Lysell. The list really goes on. What are your thoughts on Jelvik and Gasso? And then, do the Bruins have a reputation issue around the NHL in terms of developing younger players?
Yeah, my thoughts on starting with Jelvik and Gasso my thoughts are honestly not all that extensive, because I don't think either one of them is a particularly high-end prospect. I do think Gasso would have a chance to play NHL games in a fourth line role. I think that's probably his ceiling. So I guess I shouldn't be so dismissive. It's like he could be an NHLer, and that's not something to totally ignore. But the story with him and the reporting around that is that he wanted NHL games this season to burn the first year of his entry-level contract. And the Bruins are in the middle of a playoff race when BC season ended, and he just wasn't going to get that. So I don't think it rose fully to the level of like a straight ultimatum of like, play me or else. Like I think Andre Gasso is a little smarter than that. You know, this is a kid who was a captain at BC. By all accounts, was a great leader there. Like, he's not a meathead, but I do think he probably wanted more than the Bruins could give him. And that goes for not just this past season, but probably even looking ahead to next season, where, you know, they probably gave him an honest assessment of like, you'll have the same shot as everyone else, but we can't make any promises. And so for him, it's been, you know, was drafted in 2021. So he has the right, now that he's graduated college, if he wants, to wait till August and become a free agent and not sign with the team that drafted him. And it seems like he's going to explore that opportunity and see what else is out there, and see if there's a team that might be willing to give him more playing time or more opportunity than the Bruins could. So that's Gasso. And then Jelvik, I just kind of think, unfortunately, became almost a non-prospect for the Bruins. He's battled a ton of injuries the last 2 years and just hasn't played a lot of hockey. Things were looking pretty good prior to that. Like, he played in BC's top 6 2 years ago when they went to the national championship game. So clearly he is someone who can, like, there's some skill there, and he's been a contributor and a scorer. He was a point per game right around there that year. And if he had kept tracking up from there, I think we'd be talking about a pretty legit prospect. Unfortunately, he just hasn't played much hockey, and he's battled injuries, and you're limited to 50 contract slots for your organization. And I think the Bruins just weren't willing to use one on him. So you let him go explore other opportunities. He ended up going back home to Sweden. So that's how I view those two situations. And then the bigger picture, is there a reputation problem? Yeah, probably. I think it's pretty well known that they've struggled to, especially among skilled prospects, I would say that they've struggled to graduate their prospects into meaningful NHL roles. The last top 6 forward that they produced, their draft pick came up through their system, played regular minutes in a top 6 role, was Jake DeBrusk. Like, that was a 2015 draft pick. He was drafted 11 years ago. That's just a long time to go without having a hit like that. And we can go through all the reasons why, right? They haven't had top picks. You hope James Hagens is going to become that, and I think he will. Well, where did you get Hagens? You drafted him 7th overall. How many other times did you draft him in the top 10 since Don Sweeney got here? 0.
Yeah.
Haven't had it. So, yeah, that's the most obvious spot to find top 6 forwards. They haven't been drafting there. So that right there is problem number 1. But on top of that, when you're picking late in the first round, or if you want to look at 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks, all of them on their own, you're yeah, the chances of hitting on that player and having them be a real impact NHL player is low. So each one individually, you're well, all right, look at who was drafted around them. How many real hits were there, right? Look at where Fabian Lysell was drafted. Okay, we know why Johnston went a couple picks later, but guys taken ahead of him and behind him, there's a bunch of misses in there. Johnny Beecher at the end of the first round, that 2020, that was 2019. That first round wasn't very good. Okay, Shane Pinto came a little bit after in the 2nd round. So yes, there was a player there. There were a couple players there, but there were also a lot of misses. So all these on their own, it's you can explain away. But just in the aggregate of 10 years without doing this, there's got to be 1 or 2 in there. Wherever you find them, whether it's middle of first round, late first, a 2nd, a 3rd, as an organization, you have to have a hit somewhere. You have to have someone that you drafted, developed, turned into an impact, top to middle of the lineup player. At one point, it looked like Matt Poitras was going to be this, and maybe he still will be, but he's not yet. Mason Lohrei has played on the top pair before. I would say it's still a good pick in the 2nd round, no matter what else happens from here. You had a late 2nd rounder who turned into a legit NHL defenseman. That's in draft terms, that's a hit. But how impactful is he really going to be moving forward? I think we're seeing real question marks about that when he gets scratched in the playoffs and he's still playing mostly 3rd pairing minutes this season. So that's where it starts to hurt, is where even these guys where you start to feel encouraging, it feels like they then hit some sort of wall or plateau. And it's why can't they, again, the simplest solution is going to be well, pick higher and get the more surefire prospects. Duh. But short of that, it's why can they not seem to get other guys over that hump where they keep seeming to hit this wall and just stall out at 22, 23, 24 years old?
So you mentioned DeBrusk being the only top 6 forward to come through their system in the last decade plus, and even DeBrusk was 14th overall. So we all know what happened with Senyshyn, but it's your success rate of producing a top 9 forward in the top 15 of the draft, you should be able to get somebody there that at least is a serviceable NHL player at least. So even that pick, I have a hard time giving them a ton of flowers. Well, you better. You messed on Senesh, and you might as well get at least one of those, right? So, but it's interesting because so when you do find somebody like a Patra that clearly can play at the NHL level, we've just talked about, you just highlighting how difficult it is for the Bruins to come by these players in the draft that actually can be something. They find somebody in Patra who can be something, and they're playing with their food with them. He's like one of your few success stories, and you're kind of playing with him a bit in the minors, which I get it. To develop in the AHL is one thing, but it just seems, Scott, the 22-23 season, they broke records, okay? And you still had Bergeron, and Krejci had came back, and Marchand. There was no room on the NHL roster, is my point. But the last 3 years, even dating back to the Centennial season, a season, by the way, which Matt Patra started on the roster, but the Centennial season, the 24-25 season when they ended up tanking, and then even this past year, the past 3 seasons, you can't tell me, not that you are, but that the Bruins NHL roster hasn't had opportunity to keep bringing in some of their own draft picks to see what they can do. I'm happy they're doing it with Husnudinov and Minton, but those aren't guys from your own system. See what you have with some of these players. They've had opportunity and they haven't.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because you're right. Like, there's been some opportunity for these guys they've found elsewhere, right? Like, Fraser Minton was a first-round pick for Toronto that they acquire in the Brandon Carlo trade. He makes the team out of camp, becomes a regular, now looks like a real player to have moving forward. Marat Husnudinov, they identified as a piece they wanted back in the Justin Brazeau trade. And now he looks like a regular. So it's almost like it's not, everyone says like they don't want to give guys they don't want to give young players opportunities at the NHL level. And it's like, well, it's not really that, because they have done that. Like, there were young players who got playing time this season, but it's like with their own guys, they're not doing it. And I just like, that's where I look at, like, we had this conversation on Skate Pod. Like, what are they doing in Providence? And does some sort of change need to be made there? And I don't just mean that the head coach and Ryan Mougenel, but like how they're managing those guys and how they're managing that roster and what they're doing with their prospects in the AHL. Because it feels like like Salin Patra, for starters. Maybe even Frederic Brunet. We'll see what kind of opportunity he gets going forward. But like, are going there and then getting stuck. And it's like, why has it been so hard for players who they tell us are like doing the things they need them to do in Providence? Think especially of Matt Patra, right? Who goes down there as an offensive player, puts up a bunch of points his first full season in the AHL. And then they say, okay, now we need you to work on other aspects of your game, become more well-rounded. His point total dips this season in Providence, but, and again, I'm not going to pretend I watched every Providence regular season game, because I certainly didn't. But they tell us he became a much more well-rounded player. Don Sweeney says that. Ryan Mougenel says it. It's like, okay, then I look at that and I'm like, then he should be ready, right? So Matt Patra should be on your NHL team next year. He showed he can score. He showed he can become more well-rounded. What else is there to do in the AHL? So, like, let's see. Like, is he going to get that opportunity next year? I'm very skeptical. And they do need to figure that out. Like, why guys are going to Providence, in theory, like, working on the things they want them to work on, but then getting stuck there and not graduating to NHL regulars. Like, why is it easier to find 22-year-olds and 21-year-olds from other organizations who are NHL ready than guys who are coming up through your own system? Like, it should be the opposite. The guys in your own system should be the ones doing exactly what you want, who are ready. And yet that doesn't seem to happen.
Right. It's almost as if the Bruins either A, are harder on their own draft picks, or B, the prospects that they bring in from other organizations are further along in their development when they get to the Bruins, which speaks to the Bruins' development. And Fraser Minton, just slight correction, Scott, was early second round, 6th overall in the second round. So he was a early second round pick. But yeah, something's off there. And as I said with Patra, you've had so many whiffs in the draft. You actually got somebody in the second round, and Lohrei to a lesser extent, because Lohrei's at least gotten a fair shake in the NHL. But you finally have a second rounder that you can honestly say can play in the NHL, and you're playing with him in the minors. And oh, by the way, in addition to what you said about him showing himself well in Providence this year, even though the production wasn't as high as maybe people would have thought, in his brief NHL stint this year, 2 games, he played well. But you bring up you're skeptical of him getting a chance next year. It's like, yeah, because you have Sean Corrali in the second year of his deal at 4th line center. You have Tanner Jeannot and Mark Kaslick, and you have Alex Steeves and Lucas Reichel, who may start in Providence. But so it's something. Mikey Asimont, didn't even mention him. I speak about Asimont like he's already gone. They still have to find a way to get rid of him. And no disrespect, I like Asimont, but the Bruins have to finagle some roster space this offseason. So yeah, it's fascinating to me. And also, you hit on something earlier, which is the Bruins have not had a lot of high-end draft capital for a long time because they've been having teams that were contending and they were going for it and sacrificing collateral at deadlines. We all know the story. But you look at the Bruins championship team in 2011 and the core pieces on that team: Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, Milan Lucic, Brad Marchand. 4 forwards right there. Not one of them was a first-round pick. Now, of course, you brought in Zdeno Chara in free agency, as you've said before on the Skate Pod, arguably the greatest free agent acquisition of all time. And you had some other free agents in there. You brought in Michael Ryder in the 08-09 season. You brought in Peverly and Kelly via trade. Mark Savard was a part of that era that got things going. Marco Stern was part of the Joe Thornton trade. Like there was a lot of Gregory Campbell, Nathan Horton. You traded for them. Sean Thornton, I forget if he was a free agent guy or he was probably a free agent acquisition. I imagine probably.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So that championship team, Dennis Seidenberg, you brought in at the trade deadline in the 2009-2010 season. Johnny Boychuk, you brought in from Colorado's system, I believe. Andrew Ferentz, you brought in via trade. So it was a smorgasbord of players on that team, which is how things should operate. But your core forwards, Bergeron, Krejci, Lucic, who was the other one that I said? Marchand. They were all non-first-round draft picks. And, of course, you have a young Tyler Seguin who was second overall that year. So, yeah, the Bruins haven't had high-end draft capital for a long time because they've been going for it. But their early 2000s, mid-2000s regime was built on non-first rounders. And the Tampa Bay Lightning championship teams in the late 20 teens, you had a lot of non-first rounders on that roster. Not to cherry pick one team, but Kucherov wasn't a first rounder. I don't think Point was. I don't think Cirelli was. I don't think Killorn was. I don't think Palat was. So hitting on non-first round picks, that's part of the game too. But you mentioned 2 names, Lohrei and Patra, non-first rounders, right? So the Bruins, I don't know. It's tough to excuse. I know the probabilities are tougher the lower you draft, but the Bruins have done it in the past. Other teams have done it. So we can't, not that you are, but we can't excuse that. And then the players that they have drafted outside the first round, like Lohrei and Patra in particular, it's kind of like, why are you not being this kid's biggest cheerleader? Like, especially when he's done things that you've asked of him. So to tie this back to the Jelvik and Gasso part of it, which I know is not the sexy part of this conversation, but I just wonder if use those 2 guys, use an arbitrary prospect in the future. Do prospects look at this Bruins team and say, hey, listen, it's not very kind to prospects trying to make their way. And if the Bruins had ample examples of players that have gone through their system instead of just Jake DeBrusk, I wonder if players would look at the Bruins as, well, you know what? The proof's been in the pudding with them, so I'm going to trust this organization. And I don't think they have that. I don't think they have that luxury right now with people, whether it's somebody as insignificant as Oscar Jelvik or somebody as prominent as, Matt Patra, call it.
Yeah, and I think there's so much that goes into that because I don't think too many 18-year-old kids are going back through teams' drafts and figuring out, you know, oh, this organization's done this and this organization's done that, but that their agents have an idea. And
Yeah.
so it's well, what is the agent planting in their heads? And that probably just comes down to what is that agent's relationship with Don Sweeney and the Bruins front office? Because there's agents that he has pretty good relationships with who are happy their clients are here. And they're not gonna badmouth. Even if they look at it and say, yeah, I don't know if they've been the best with drafting and developing. If they have a good relationship, they're gonna say, hey, kid, you're going to a good organization. If you work hard, they're gonna reward you. If it's an agent who has maybe not the best relationship or has had one of these prospects who they feel has gotten buried, then that agent might be more likely to say, listen, they drafted you, we'll deal with this for now, but let's keep in mind maybe we push for a different opportunity at some point if things aren't going our way. So there's all that stuff that happens behind the scenes too. And then each kid's different. There's going to be prospects, and these are the kind of kids you want to find in the draft who are I don't care what they've done in the past, I'm going to be better than those guys. And they're just going to be confident, and it's not going to matter to them. And then there will be someone who it gets in his head and thinks Bruins have it out to get me. They want me to go back to college for another year. They want me to start in the AHL, right? People were doing this. People were doing this on behalf of James Hagens without having any idea of what Hagens was actually thinking. Where they're he's going to be pissed. He's going to request a trade because they're making him start in Providence. And it's no, well, it turns out James Hagens is just fine. Thank you for asking, but kid, he has a good head on his shoulders and he's not requesting a trade. So in the case of James Hagens, you're good because he like I said, he has a good head on his shoulders and he didn't overreact and throw a hissy fit because they want him to go to Providence. But yeah, do you risk running into that at some point with someone else that you want to quote unquote overcook or whatever? Yeah, you do. I mean, it happened with Isaac Howard, right? It happened with Rutger McGroarty, right? It's happened with some of these kids who, teams say, yeah, we want you to go back to college. And they're I'm ready for the pros. Why aren't you signing me? So, and then, like I said, the same thing too with the AHL, where it can be, all right, I've done my time in the AHL, or I'm too good to go to the AHL period.
Mhm.
So yeah, you do have to be aware of that stuff. And I'm sure in some circles, the Bruins have that reputation of hey, this organization kind of likes to overcook prospects and, really make them do their time. And that could be a turnoff in certain cases. The other side of that is I think a lot of kids would look at the Bruins and be that's been one of the most that they're there every year. Right? They missed the playoffs last year and that was shocking.
Mm.
I want to go to an organization that it's in the playoffs every year or far more often than not. So I just think so many different kids are going to be wired so many different ways and value so many different things that, for as much as we might focus right now on the negative aspect of, well, they're not drafting and developing a lot of guys into impact NHLers. Some other kid might say, well, that's a team that has David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy, and they're in the playoffs every year. Yeah, sign me up.
Yeah. So we've talked about this in the past. I agree with the adage that the NHL is not a developmental league. I completely agree. I will just say, and I don't think you disagree with this, but correct me if I'm wrong, but anybody who's making their NHL debut, you can be as ready as possible to get there. But the whole adage of it's not a developmental league, that's not entirely true, because anybody who's making their first debut at the highest level, there's an adjustment period. So do you feel like the Bruins are just maybe too stubborn to allow a little bit of a threshold for that adjustment? How do you avoid that? You can't avoid it if it's your first NHL action. You have to get used to the speed and the tempo and everything happening quicker. And so, are you worried that the Bruins are are going to be too stubborn going forward to fix this problem that you and I see. Like, for example, like Matt, take the Matt Poitras example, right? Like, just use him. Are you worried that they'll keep overcooking him, or like, are you optimistic that they would find a place for him next year? Are they gonna would they remove a Sean Corrali for Matt to play? Like, I don't know. That's part of the problem to me.
Yeah, so I'm actually super curious to see how this plays out, because I think you're hitting at like one of the most important questions for the Bruins moving into next season, where what was the mantra going into this season? It was about reestablishing identity, being hard to play against, piss and vinegar. For the most part, they succeeded in reestablishing that, right? Like, Marcus Sturm was really good for that. We can nitpick like the defensive structure and some of the breakdowns and chances they gave up, but like the bigger picture of like, be hard to play against, work hard, don't be an easy out, don't roll over. Like, they did that, and it got them 100 points and it got them back in the playoffs. Then they come up short in the first round. They lose in 6 to Buffalo. Okay, what do we hear afterwards from Sturm and from the front office? Sturm says, basically, like, I think we got the most out of this roster. He was like, a team couldn't have worked harder than they did, is what he said. Neely acknowledges we need more speed and skill. Sweeney said that too in his end of season press conference. So step one for this retool, whatever you want to call it, was reestablish like a base level of effort, work ethic, physicality, hard to like all that stuff. Okay, you did that. And now all parties acknowledge, they all said it after the season. Next step to get to the next level is speed and skill. Is all right, now we got to make more things happen. Like, okay, we can be hard to play against, we can hit guys. Now we got to create more chances, we got to be faster, we got to score more goals. Okay, are you going to allow for players who can make that happen, but might not perfectly fit into this identity that you tried to establish last year, right? So like this past season, maybe there wasn't as much room to give some young player the rope they would need to learn on the job in the NHL, because you're so focused on, we got to play this way, we got to do this, and you lean on veterans who have been there and done that. Okay, well, now if you need to take the next level, there's no perfect scenario where it's like, well, now we're going to go find guys who do the piss and vinegar, but are also faster and more skilled. It's like, okay, yeah, every team would love to go sign four power forwards who play like Cam Neely did in his prime. They're not available. Okay. So are you going to allow for guys who might be more skilled and faster and more creative, but don't bring that other stuff that you wanted to reestablish, or don't bring as much of it, or don't bring it on a consistent basis? Their comments at the end of the season would lead you to believe that, yes, they're going to allow for more of that because they recognize they need more of the upside that they're chasing. I'm just going to be so skeptical until I actually see that, because this organization doesn't do that. And we've seen them go into off seasons before where they say they need to get faster, and then they sign bigger, physical, slower free agents. And it's like, well, last off season, Cam Neely says they looked at some bigger ticket items, but they couldn't get anything done. And so, they went the veteran depth route. And it's like, okay, so what happens this summer if you can't get one of the stars that's out there? You can't make a trade for Robert Thomas or Jason Robertson. Okay, are you going to once again just fall back on, well, we'll be tough to play against? Or are you going to open up opportunities for James Hagens to learn on the job and Matt Poitras to get a real chance, and, go find someone who's not at the top of the market, but make a hockey trade for someone who maybe hasn't fully panned out elsewhere? Like, that's what I think they need to do. but we'll see if they actually do.
Yeah, I have a different definition of piss and vinegar than I think Cam Neely certainly has. And don't get me wrong, Scott. Like I am a fan of the game, student of the game, going back forever, right? And I appreciate every era for what it was. I love me some black and blue hockey from the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and there's nothing more entertaining than a great open ice hit or putting a defenseman through the M boards on a good in a clean way on a good forecheck. I get all that, but the modern day piss and vinegar is foot speed. The modern day piss and vinegar is using your foot speed to angle off defenders on the forecheck, to check with your feet, to force oppositions into decisions before they want to. And we talked about it on the skate pod, but the Carolina Hurricanes, like a Logan Stankoven or a Seth Jarvis, those are undersized forwards. They are not Tom Wilson. They are not Tanner Jeannot. They're not putting anybody through the glass. But when defensemen go to retrieve pucks, they turn around and they're right on their tail. And you saw that with Buffalo against the Bruins. Like, to be able to check with your feet, and that is the modern day piss and vinegar. Hitting is always going to be a part of the game. Do not get me wrong. There's a time and a place for everything. You have to be physical too. But that's what matters most. That's what matters most. And I think Matt Poitras is an example of that. I would much rather have Matt Poitras, get it on the forecheck and use his hockey IQ. By the way, I love Sean Corrali as a player. I have nothing but respect for him. He's from day one, dating back to when he was younger in the 17 season, professional on and off the ice. And I think this past season, I think it was very important to have a guy like that in the room, because the Bruins locker room was very vulnerable heading into this past season, and you needed some calming veteran presence there. I question how much that is needed next year, now that they've already established some of that, and their need going forward is what we've been talking about. So I'm not wishing Sean Corrali out of a job out of any vitriol or malintent here, but you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing here? And the reason I bring up Sean Corrali is because if they didn't have Alex Steves, if they didn't have Jeannot and Kastelik and Reichel and all these, and Acima and all these bottom six options, then fine. But there's a surplus of it unless something's done. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But I wanted to transition to another Bruins prospect here, and that is James Hagens. James Hagens has not had the most productive World Championships so far for Team USA, and in their most recent game, he was a healthy scratch. The addition of Matthew Tkachuk obviously kind of forced that hand. So I've seen you writing about him online. I've chimed in as well on your rhetoric, and I'm sure your comments and mentions have been very similar to mine. There is a lot of hysteria right now among some Bruins fans about James Hagens is a bust. James Hagens should have never left BC. He should be at BC next year. James Hagens will be nothing better than a third liner in the NHL. I'm seeing everything. Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think some people got to slow down a little bit. Look, his play at World Championships has been disappointing through 3 games. That is totally fair. He's not made a lot happen. He's had 2 shots on goal, no points, and then gets scratched for the 4th game. So that's not ideal. Now, he's also the youngest player on the team, worth noting. And he's jumped up several levels just in the last couple of months. In March, he was still playing college games. So he turns pro, goes to the AHL, NHL, gets 3 Stanley Cup playoff games where, I thought his game did slip through those 3 games, but also there were definitely flashes there where he showed he could handle himself and was not overmatched. Now, he wasn't taking over and producing the way that, say, Porter Martone was. And I've said before, it's it almost becomes unfair because Porter Martone, what he's doing right now is the exception. And by the way, he's also at the World Championships and I think has a point per game for Canada. So, that's kid who went one pick ahead of Hagens, and he's doing it and he's producing. He's also just a very different body type, right? He's what 6'3", 210, 215. Hagens, we know, is a little undersized, so physically Hagens is not there when it comes to playing against men just yet. And the other thing, and I think I mentioned this on the skate podcast at times, was like I've seen Hagens start slow. And it was part of why like I was so cautious about him, about the impact he can make early on. His freshman year at BC, he started slow and took a little bit to get going. This past season at BC, he started slow where his production like out of the gate this year at BC was more what it was his freshman year. It was like, yeah, it's a point per game, but we kind of thought he was going to take a step, like, or make a jump forward. And then eventually he did. In the second half of the season, he was one of the most productive players in the country. And I was just like, like maybe this is just the type of player who at this point in the career starts slow and like takes a little bit to find his game. And that's been in my mind a lot thinking about this is like, okay, 6 games in the AHL, 2 regular season games and 3 playoff games. Like, yeah, maybe it shouldn't be all that surprising that it's been a little bit slower for him this spring as he's moved up levels. By the way, I wouldn't be shocked if he starts next season slow either. And like eventually you got to break that habit. Like, right, like you can't be a slow starter every year. Morgan Geekie was a guy who was pretty notoriously a slow starter until this season when he came out of the gates as one of the hottest goal scorers in the NHL. Hopefully, for Hagens' sake, it doesn't take until he's 26 years old to break that habit. But like for now, like that might be a real thing for him is that he's going to be a kid who takes a little bit to find his game before he gets going. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say it's disappointing, but I would also really caution against anyone like worrying too much about it. Even as I think I've probably been someone who's taken a more cautious approach in terms of expectations with Hagens, and I was on team like, yeah, give him time in the AHL. Like I was fine not starting him in the NHL. And yet, like through all that, like I think he's going to be fine. And I still think he's going to be a good to really good player. Is he ever going to be a number one set, like a legit number one center in the NHL? I don't know. Like let's revisit this like as he progresses. But I think he's going to be a good NHLer, an impact player, probably in the top 6. Like, but it's not going to happen right away. So like, okay, like you're just going to have to accept he didn't make the immediate impact that Porter Martone did, but like very few 19-year-olds do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's a lot of things at play here that I feel like are working against James Hagens in terms of public perception of him to start his pro career, right? His details were really good in Providence, but he didn't light the world on fire from a production standpoint in Providence in his 6-game sample. Would he have 4 or 5 points maybe in 6 games? Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 4. Yeah, I think it was 4, and like 3 of them were on the power play.
Yeah, so even before his Bruins call up, people were kind of, he's not really crushing it in terms of production. And if you're looking at the box score only, yeah, I mean that's fair. Then he goes to the Boston Bruins. He gets an assist in his first game. An assist that he started the whole play. The goal doesn't happen without him. It's all effort. But then beyond that, he goes scoreless the rest of his time in Boston. And now he is pointless, obviously, in world championships. So people have seen him now at the professional level, whether it be the AHL, the NHL, or international, and the production hasn't been there. And so they're looking at it saying, what's going on with this kid? He doesn't seem that dangerous out there at all. What I would say is, okay, fair, but people need to keep some perspective here. He's still only 19 years old. 19 years old, right? Like that's very, very young, especially when you're playing against men. And he needs this off season. He's had a very long year. You highlighted it. NCAA to the AHL to the NHL, all while living, I think, in his college dorm or a hotel. To the NHL,
World Juniors mixed in.
Yeah, exactly. World Juniors. now World Championships in Switzerland. The kid's been all over the world, and he needs a summer. He needs a summer to absorb and kind of recap and process what he's learned over the last couple of months in particular, and get bigger, get stronger, work on his game all off season. He hasn't had that break yet, so just keep that in mind. Also, I don't think Matthew Schaefer being the first overall pick and winning the Calder and the Porter Martone example you highlighted help people who are looking at top 10 picks from that draft. But in the same breath, I would say, are Nashville fans calling Brady Martin a bust? Are Utah fans calling Caleb Denwyer a bust? Are Seattle fans calling Jake O'Brien a bust? Or where did Eklund go? Who drafted him? Buffalo? They got him and Merker, right? With 2 picks, maybe? Oh, no. Islanders.
Yeah. Eklund was Islanders. Yeah.
So, you get what I'm saying? Like, there are top 10 picks in that draft, too, that haven't even done any, Martin played some games with Nashville, but Denwyer, O'Brien, those guys. So, he's 19. Just pump the brakes on. I'm not anointing him the future number 1 center. I don't know what his ceiling is yet, TBD. But to call the kid a bust because he's not lighting it up in a couple of pro games, remember, Brad Marchand didn't have his first full season in the NHL until he was 23. That's just one example. Your famous phrase, Scott, development is non-linear, right? So just everybody's you just got to relax a little bit.
Yeah, but by the way, Anton Frundell, who went 3rd in that draft, has been scratched from Sweden's lineup for a couple of these games. And I like Frundell, and I don't think he's a bust. So, and that's someone who played even more NHL games than Hagens this season, because obviously Chicago was out of it.
Good point. Question I just thought of here, because we're talking about World Championships and Bruins players. Now, Fraser Minton is playing with Team Canada. Do you think that between the combination of Hagens, Minton, and Dean Letourneau, that one of those 3 could be the Bruins' legit number 1 center of the future? Do you think that we keep talking about Robert Thomas or this, could the Bruins have him internally? It wouldn't be this October per se, unless maybe it was Minton and you just hit the ground running. But could the answer be under their nose right now? I know it's a gamble. I know it's a risk. But isn't everything kind of a risk in pro sports?
It's possible. I guess I would say, if I had to bet on it right now, if you were gun to your head, do one of these guys become a true number 1 center, meaning 70 plus points, well-rounded game, part of a really good first line, I would bet no.
Okay.
But Hagens obviously has the highest upside. If I had to guess where he ends up, I think it's really good second liner, whether that's center or wing. Minton, I would say clearly really good middle 6 center, whether that ends up being high end 3rd line center or good 2nd line center. And Letourneau, I think Letourneau's a little further back in his development, obviously. If I were betting now, I would probably target him for 3rd line, but acknowledging that there is still upside, still untapped upside there, where it wouldn't shock me if he blows past that.
Yeah, if he continues to have another outstanding year next year for BC as the guy, when a player like that with that kind of size and skill, when it clicks for them, you might want to look out, because his natural size alone, it's going to be really difficult to play against at the pro level. So if he can figure it out and mentally grow into his body, which it looks like he's doing as of last season, Scott. So I'm very intrigued by what he could be. I don't know if he's going to be number 1 center, but in any event, let's move on to the next question I have for you, which is your off-season game plan, right? Like, we've had conversations on the Skate Pod before about the narrow margins that exist right now for the Boston Bruins when you're in the middle of a retool / rebuild, but call it what you will. But you have McAvoy in his late 20s, Pasternak in his late 20s, you have Geeky in his mid-late 20s, Zaka later 20s, Swayman mid-late 20s. And then you have, obviously some younger players we've been talking about, but you're trying to optimize those guys as windows. But my question for you is, how realistic is that? And what would your offseason game plan for the Bruins be? What would be a good offseason for the Bruins this summer?
I mean, the number one pipe dream I would have for this offseason is going big for number one center. So obviously we've talked a lot about Robert Thomas. I would add Nico Hischier to that conversation as a player who seems like maybe isn't totally thrilled in New Jersey at the moment and has 1 year left on his contract. So, does something shake out there? Fully acknowledging that those are both very, very small percentage opportunities of something actually coming together. Because for all the reasons we said, teams just don't generally move on from those guys. The Blues have Robert Thomas on a very good contract for what, 6 more years, 5 more years. They would have to be absolutely blown away. Nico Hischier is the Devils' captain, and you got to imagine they want to do everything they can to keep him. Now, if he goes to them and says, I absolutely want out, I'm not re-signing, well, then they probably have no choice. But short of that, they're not just going to, obviously, they're not just going to trade him. So, and what you would have to give up for either one of them, it's going to be uncomfortable. I would be willing to get uncomfortable because I just think the path from here to the Bruins next contending for a Stanley Cup, it has to include a number one center. There's just no other way to do it. Teams, you just don't see teams competing for Stanley Cups that don't have that guy. And I don't think the Bruins, again, we just talked about how likely is it that any of these young kids become that? Hagens maybe, but we'll see. It's going to be a while. So that would be my dream off season, is do whatever it takes to get that. And then whatever else you do beyond that, honestly, if other stuff has to get pushed off, then so be it. That's the most important thing they have to do between now and cup contention. So if you can't do that, if that's not out there, what does my offseason look like? Well, I do want to address defense, right? If I can't get a number one center, which is one of the pieces I clearly need between now and serious cup contention, the number two thing I need is another legit top 4 defenseman on the left or right side. Honestly, there's an obvious hole in the lineup right now on the right side behind McAvoy, but you're going to need someone on the left in the years to come too. So I would like to try to find that this offseason. And that's where, we had a debate on the Skate Pod about, is it worth going after Rasmus Andersson or Darren Radish? For the cost, I'm probably a little higher on Radish and more willing to take that chance. Anderson worries me a bit. I just don't know how much I buy into where his game is right now. Radish worries me too, because he's only been at this level for one season, and it came when he was 29 going on 30. That is late for a player to break out like this. But I'll take the chance that it was pretty real. Even if it's not 70 points, maybe he's high 50, 60 points moving forward. His underlying metrics were all really good. I don't think it's as simple as just saying he was a product of Tampa Bay's system or the team around him. I think he legit had a great season in his own right. Every time I watched him, I was impressed. It didn't, you know what I mean? It didn't look fake. The numbers he ended up with, it didn't feel or look fake.
And he can shoot the puck hard.
Oh, he has a great shot.
Not many guys can wire like that. And I said to you on the Skate Pod, not to interrupt you, but the biggest thing though there is he was the power play quarterback for a Tampa Bay team where in Boston, you mentioned on the skate pod, maybe they do a tandem with him and Charlie, but otherwise, he's not going to take over for Charlie's spot right away. It's politics. It won't happen.
Yeah, and that's fair, and that is certainly where he did a lot of his damage. I do think if he comes in and McAvoy isn't doing a great job on the top unit, like at some point you just have to be willing to have that conversation, right? Like, listen, Charlie McAvoy has generally not been a great power play quarterback. There have been stretches where he's been a good one, including I think most of this past season when their power play was humming along until it fell off down the stretch. But McAvoy can't have that job for life. Like, if he's not going to be elite at it, that can't just be handed to him every single year until his time with the Bruins comes to an end. Everyone loves McAvoy. Like, he is a leader. He is a key part of this franchise. But to some level, like, you do have to earn that. And if someone comes along and is just better at it than you, they have to be willing to pull the trigger on that and sit McAvoy down and talk to him and explain it and whatever. And he might be pouty for a few days, but like, you got to trust that like eventually he'll get over it and understand all the other ways he can impact a game, like he does when he's on Team USA and not getting power play time, and yet is still one of their top players. So I think like you can do that if it comes to that. And I would just add like Radish's 5-on-5 numbers were also really good. So he was impacting the game in a lot of different ways. So whether it's that or a trade, which I admittedly don't have a ton of names at the moment. You can look at like Philip Roenick in Vancouver, Zellweger, maybe not an established top 4 guy right now, but has that kind of upside still, I think.
Nemec.
Simone Nemitz in New Jersey, which, by the way, so on the skateboard we're talking about at the very end, like a report broke from a Slovakian or Czech outlet or whatever it was that he requested a trade. And then I saw a conflicting report from someone at another outlet out of Europe saying, no, he hasn't. And he actually has been meeting with the GM. So we got like Czech and Slovak media wars going on over this. So I don't know exactly what's happening there. But certainly a name that has popped up in trade rumors before. So yeah, like all of that, I'm looking into all of it. But what I really want to see this offseason from the Bruins is you have these two obvious areas that you need upgrades. Not necessarily to make you a contender next year. I've said all along, like, I have more patience than that. But between now and whenever you contend again, it's like you need a number one center. You need to upgrade your defense. Maybe even beyond the number one center, you're going to need another scoring wing at some point. So, like, to me, like, you got to get one of these guys. Like, you got to get either someone who's a difference maker now already, or at least has the potential to become that. For me, it cannot be a stand pat. We talked to Don Sweeney on, late afternoon, July 1st, and they've filled in with veterans again. Not that they even have that many spots to fill in. And we hear like, yeah, well, we hear from Cam Neely at the preseason press conference. Yeah, we wanted to do something bigger, but it wasn't really out there. And it's like, you can't keep going year to year without doing something bigger. Because then you just end up kind of just stuck in the middle where it's like, all right, well, what is that accomplishing? Like, now you're just prolonging the amount of time that you're a fringe playoff team. You're getting deeper into Pasternak and McAvoy's prime, and that just feels like you're not going in any direction. Like, you're just kind of stuck in mud.
Yeah, you definitely can't do nothing, right? You can't do nothing. Scott, and we started the podcast talking about the Bruins' lack of, drafting and developing success, we'll call it. And I'm really not trying to be, pessimistic about that. It's just, let's call it for what it is, right? Like, it's been pretty rough over the last decade plus. They have finally recuperated a lot of draft capital, and some really promising prospects. And what I'm fearful of is the Bruins risk a lot of that and give a lot of that away after just replenishing it to go in for Robert Thomas, who, by the way, I love Robert Thomas, and like, there's definitely a lot I would give up for him, but I'm playing devil's advocate here. I also don't think Thomas is available. To your point, everything you said earlier, he's on a great contract. St. Louis has 3 first-round picks this year. He's 27 to start next season. He's still in his prime, like borderline earlier part of it. It's like, I don't know why they would have to give up on him, but regardless, my fear is that you would have to give up, a couple of key high-end first-round picks this year, maybe next, and like a Minton or a Hagens or plus whatever, Letourneau, and then for whatever reason you bring in that centerman because you finally got your guy, and the mix is just off. The mix is off, and he doesn't really jive with McAvoy and Pastrnak and Zach. It's one of, like, we've seen plenty in the past where you have rosters where, yeah, it looks good on paper, it just doesn't jive, right? Or they just, they like each other, but they just underperform. And that's the risk you're willing to take, because maybe they do perform, but if they don't, well, now your present is underwhelming and you've given away your future. And I still think that McAvoy and Pastrnak are young enough at 28 years old and 29 going on 30, that if you have to wait a couple of years, Scott, to see if Zellers and Letourneau and Hagens and Minton can be a really good young cheap core, and maybe you can find some hockey trades along the way, or maybe a strategic good free agent ad, you could still have McAvoy and Pastrnak at 30 and 31 without sacrificing your future. And they're still in their early 30s. Don't forget, this resurgence of the Bruins in the 17-18 season with McAvoy and Grzelcyk and DeBrusk and Carlo and all them, Bergeron and Marchand and Krejci, they were in their mid-30s at that point. And you had like 6 or 7 runs with them or whatever it was. So I feel like this conversation about you have to optimize McAvoy and Pasternak's prime, I agree that you do, but I feel like there's still more to their prime than people are giving. I feel like people are talking about them like they're 35 already, and they're 28 and 29. And I know they've got a lot of tread on their tires for that age, but see, I think the Bruins have a little bit more time with them in their, like, whether it's their prime or their later prime or their post prime. Like, you still have a decade with these guys. So like, I don't think that they're in like do or die right now. Like, they can still give it a year or two and they're still in their early 30s, 30.
Yeah, I think the concern though is like, do you lose their buy-in at some point? Like, if this becomes a longer process, and there's like, and it's, talking about development not being linear. Like, what if this retool is not linear? What if something happens like what happened with Washington, where the Capitals were the model of retool on the fly, and 1 year after selling, they squeeze into the playoffs. And then the next year they have the best record in the East, and oops, now they missed the playoffs, and it all takes a step back. And it's like, so what did they actually accomplish? And like, where are they now? Like, if that happens with the Bruins, where it's like, say they take a step back either next year or the year after because they haven't addressed some of these bigger picture problems. By the way, like, one of the Capitals' problems was like, they didn't really have a true number one center either, and still don't. So if you're stuck there where it's like, okay, well, we're right around it, and we made the playoffs this year and then we missed it, and now we're back, but like, how do we get to cup? How do we contend for a Stanley Cup? If Pastrnak and McAvoy are sitting around 2-3 years from now, still wondering that, like, now you do risk them just wanting out and going somewhere that is closer to real, true contention. In which case, like, now you're entering something a little longer. So that's the concern, is like, yes, you have some time, but it's not infinite. Like, you can't just be completely patient the way a full-on rebuilding team is. Like, you do have to try to have the accelerator pressed down a little bit here.
Yeah, see, I think they can still be competitive and a team that's getting better, like in the process. But I'll go with you for a second here because my reaction to that, Scott, honestly, is if in 2 or 3 years one or both of those guys want out, then I would say, okay, time to go. And we will get whatever we can for you. Because I can promise you this, Scott. If they want out in 2 or 3 years, one or both of them, and Pasternak is 32, 33, or McAvoy is 32, you don't think you're still getting a king's ransom for them to somebody who's, maybe a contender or close to it? They're still in their early 30s. Then you get whatever you can for them, which will be a lot, and it will help, a core that's now 2 or 3 years in, like Minton and Hagens. Like those guys will have some experience now. And in the same breath, I would say, if in 2 or 3 years from now, Scott, so if we're talking 2028, 2029, McAvoy and Pasternak want out, you know what I would say to that as well? Well, you've had Pasternak since 2014, and you've had McAvoy since 2017. You've had a decade plus with these two guys, and you never got it done. You probably won't get it done in the next 4 years with them either. So you know what? They've had their day, their long day in the sun. It's time to move on, and we will get a lot for them because McAvoy and Pasternak won't be 38. They'll be 33 and 32. I'm not saying I want them traded, but if it ever got to that and the players force that hand, all right, adios. And now Minton's 25, Hagens is 22, Laterno's in the picture, Zello's in the picture, other future picks and prospects that they can get from now. Those guys won't be as vulnerable because they'll be now in their mid-20s, right? Early 20s. So maybe whatever you get for those guys in that situation that you present, I it might not be as doomsday as maybe some might think. They might be more mature to handle that.
So I'm with you that like if this goes south of the next few years or doesn't go well enough, and you're gonna end up in a place where you're probably looking to trade those guys anyways and like going into rebuild mode. So I'm with you. Like that's not necessarily the end of the world because you're still gonna get a ton for them. So that's my argument against the people who are like, blow it up now, rebuild now. I'm like, no, like why would you do that now? Like you don't have to do that now. They're still, those guys are still going to get you a ton in a trade 3 years from now if you have to do it then. The only thing where I think we slightly differ here is like I want to be aggressive enough to give it a real go while those guys are in their prime. Not for them, not because they want it, because I, let's say I'm Don Sweeney in this case, or Cam Neely, like I, as someone in charge of the organization, recognize we have a star forward, a number one, whatever you think of McAvoy, he's a number one defenseman. Maybe he's not a top 10 defenseman in the NHL anymore, but he's top 15 to 20 at worst. Like he is a number one defenseman. And you have a number one goalie who is a Vezina finalist this year. That's a really good backbone to start with when you're trying to build a contender. I want to take a real shot at trying to do something while I still have these guys in their prime and not just being so patient as to like hope that some of these prospects maybe, hit their ceiling and in 3 years, everything lines up exactly right where those guys are still in their prime and these guys start hitting their prime at 23 years old and are, real difference makers. Like, I don't want to trade them all away. I want to keep some of them to give them a chance, but I want to be aggressive in trying to do something, trying to add to this team so that while I have these 3 foundational pillars, I have a shot. And that's pretty much what it is for me. It's like, I just don't want to be like so patient that I'm just stuck in this, like, all right, we'll make the playoffs every year and we'll probably lose in the first round every year. But we're bringing more kids into the fold. It's like we're starting to build something. And it's like, I just don't know that the timeline is going to line up where this next wave is like fully ready to make the impact you need them to make while Pasternak's still a star and McAvoy's still a top D. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, no, I do. It's a really tricky situation, and I really see all angles. And again, and you know this, I'm not suggesting that they do nothing and stand pat. Like they have I look at their roster right now, Scott, and of players who played for them last year, there's only 3 of them that don't currently have a contract for next season. We're talking Victor Arvidsson, who's projected, according to AFP, at a 2-year deal for $4.9 million, Andrew Peeke, and Jordan Harris. So I ask you, like, are there any players in particular that are currently under contract? I mean, you can include Peeke and Arvidsson too, but they're not under contract right now. Don't you feel like some of these guys under contract with term maybe that are more vulnerable than others because of a lack of trade protection? Don't you think the Bruins have to move some of these guys to do some of these offseason plans that we're talking about?
Yeah, and I also think there's an element of like, again, it comes back to like identifying who's actually part of your team. Like, who do you actually believe in? And we talked about Lori. Like, Sturm didn't really hide the fact that like he felt like there was still a lot Lori needed to work on and improve throughout this season. We saw him a healthy scratch at times in the regular season and then in the playoffs. Henry Jokiharju spent a lot of time as a healthy scratch. That's a guy who's under contract for 2 more years. And it's like, does he really have a role here for the next 2 years? Like, it seems pretty clear your coach doesn't believe in him all that much. Mikey Eyssimont had stretches where he looked pretty good, but was a healthy scratch for much of the second half. Alex Steves, you probably can't do anything with because he's just starting a new contract, but he was a healthy scratch much of the second half. And it's like, you can't just have like all these bodies lying around that the coach isn't using or doesn't really feel fit what he wants to do. So yes, you got to shed some of that. And then you might, depending on how big you're going to go this offseason and how much you're adding, you might even have to shed some of the bigger names or bigger contracts if you don't see them being part of your longer term future. Like obviously we've talked about Zacha, Middlestat, probably top of that list, where it's like, well, we know Marco Sturm likes them. He used them in key situations, key roles last year. So you're not rushing to get rid of them. But if you find an upgrade in your top 6, it may very well come at the expense of someone from that second line last year.
Yeah. No, I agree. I last week I did an episode about who's played their last game as a Bruin, right? And I had like a couple of tiers. I had some players that were unlikely, some that maybe, and then some maybe more likely than others. And obviously, the idea wasn't that all of those names were getting moved, but could one. And honestly, a lot of them had to do with the other. Like for example, Peeke and Jokiharju, I was like, well, I think Andrew Peeke is likely someone who played his last game, but if they trade Jokiharju, before free agency, then all of a sudden, Peake's probably back, right? But Peake's not under contract. Jokiharju is. I look at some names, and Matt Poitras one, Mason Lohrei's another, where like Mikey Eyssimont, I think he's gone. I think Don probably tries to move him for like a late round pick, right? Can they move Corpusalo? Corpusalo is looking at a $4 million cap hit. Somebody pointed out to me online that I think Ottawa is covering $1 million of that, so it's $3 million for the Bruins. Is there somebody out there who could use Corpusalo, right? You mentioned Jokiharju, but Lohrei and Poitras, to me, those are guys that if you really don't want to move on from a Letourneau or a Hagens or a Zellers, or you don't want to trade while Zacha's stock is high, who else is left, right? And like those are players. I wonder if they played their last game as a Bruin. And I mean, Poitras an RFA, so he needs a contract anyway. But yeah, I just feel like there has to be some player movement this summer. But I don't really think we've had many summers where Don's been wheeling and dealing via trade. I mean, like the Zacha for Holla trade was a summertime trade, but I'm not really recounting many others. I mean, I guess Allmark maybe, right? The Allmark one.
Allmark, yeah. I mean, his very first summer for sure with trading away Lucic and Hamilton.
Right. So it has to be an active summer. And I guess my question to you is, do you trust the Bruins front office to toe that line of trying their best to optimize the present without completely sacrificing your future and progressing this team to take further steps next year? Like, and listen, if you don't want to give me a complete yes or no answer, of course I would prefer that. But if you want to lean one way, it's okay to lean. Like, do you trust the front office this offseason? Yes or no?
Probably not, because I just think it's such like a tightrope to walk that, like, I don't know that there's many front offices I would trust. So, like, overall, I'm certainly higher on Sweeney's tenure than the average fan, because I do think it's mostly been pretty damn good, right? Like, they've had good teams more often than not. In my mind, he's built two teams that were capable of winning the Stanley Cup. Neither one did. 2019, they're there. They're hosting Game 7 of the Cup final. 2023, record-setting regular season, and they just shit the bed in the first round. Like, in my mind, both of those teams were capable of winning the Stanley Cup. So
2020, weird bubble circumstances, but
yeah, that team was looking good. I think that might have been a tough trade deadline no matter what. It felt like that was really where that season swung to Tampa, right? I think that was Tampa got Blake Coleman and Yanni Gord.
Yeah.
You get Nick Ritchie and Andre Kasha, and it's like they just beat you to the punch. They just got better players at the deadline. So, yeah, but and then even 25, like, selling off, thought he did about as well a job
he did.
in some of those returns as you can do. Like, we can argue over the Marchand one, but we know the extenuating circumstances of he was injured at the time. They worked with him to send him somewhere he wanted to go. So, like, okay, like, there's all that, but I think that was a good sell-off. So, yeah, overall, like, the drafting development, as we've talked about, huge problem. Trades have been a lot of good. Resigning his own guys has been a lot of good. So I probably have more faith in Sweeney in this front office than, again, certainly than the average fan who thinks he's like the dumbest human being walking the planet and can't possibly imagine why he has this job. But I just think that what the Bruins need to do, and like the line that they're trying to toe, is just so challenging that, like, if I had to bet right now, I don't think they do it. I don't think they add like a real impact core piece this summer that makes the kind of impact it takes to get this team to the next level, as you said, like, without sacrificing the future. So I would bet against it, just because I think it's a really tough spot to be in. But I do think, like, what I do trust is that they are aware of all this and are gonna give it a real shot. Like, I don't think like Sweeney's just gonna be sitting on his hands this summer and like, well, I hope something cool falls into my lap.
No.
Like, no, I think he's gonna be putting in the work and like trying to get something done. I just think it's gonna be tough to actually pull it off.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that's why I'm saying it has to be an active. There's a lot of dominoes that have to move around and shuffle, and that's why, like, he has his work cut out for him this summer. He's got 23 guys under contract out of 26, and not all of those you want on the books next year for different reasons. You have to add guys. You have to get creative and execute some hockey trades. The reason I kind of get not upset, but I kind of scoff at the Rasmus Anderson, Darren Radish, Alex Tuck approach is because anybody with an Xbox can look at the UFA list and look at the top guys available and, dish out somebody else's money to them, right? Like, it's how hard is that to do? But what is difficult is to, pick up the phone and have real conversations around the league and identify situations where this kid can help us. He's 23, he's 24, he's 25. He hasn't been utilized properly. Look at Matt Poitras, for example. Like, I'm sure there's other teams that are looking at Matt Poitras in the Bruins and saying, yeah, I mean, we think he can do this for us, but, Boston, he's not pinning out in Boston right now for whatever reason, but we think he could be this. I think that there are examples around the league where you can exploit a situation between a player and a team for whatever reason isn't a great marriage, and you can bring a player in, right? Look at Alex Newhook, for example. Alex Newhook for the Canadiens, 25 years old, wins a Stanley Cup with Colorado. He gets traded to Montreal for Arturi Lehkonen. I think both teams win that trade so far. I mean, 2 Game 7 winners for Alex Newhook in this playoff series for Montreal, and Lehkonen's been dynamite for Colorado. Not all of these teams, not Buffalo isn't just a great team this year prior to getting eliminated because they have power in Dahlin at first overall. Like Buffalo, Montreal, Carolina, Vegas, all of these teams, like there are examples of good hockey trades in there too. Now the Bruins have some too. Fraser Minton, Pavel Zacha, Husnudinov, they're out there, but that's what I want to see more of. And you bring up the 25 deadline from Sweeney. I think he did a great job. And that's kind of why I don't want them to turn around and just piss on it by giving it all away. Like I want them to do more of that. And, I try to be as impartial as possible, Scott, but I think there's a fan within all of us. And the fan in me, I'm kind of skeptical, call it Bruins scar tissue. But even in a world where they bring in a Robert Thomas, there's a part of me that's kind of skeptical that I don't entirely trust the Bruins top players when it matters most. And that might be unfair, and that might just be Bruins scar tissue. But if you were to give McAvoy and Pastrnak what they want, to win a Stanley Cup is very difficult. One team wins every year out of 32. And I'd rather have more kicks at the can than fewer. And I don't know. I think it might just be Bruins scar tissue, but I'm trepidatious about just doubling down on McAvoy and Pastrnak. We've seen them with really good teams, and those teams didn't go all the way. I'm not trying to take it out on them, but you see teams all the time that are cup contenders, and it doesn't work out. And the probabilities would tell you, Scott, that even in a world where the Bruins acquire a Robert Thomas, it probably wouldn't translate into a championship, and you might have to sacrifice your long-term future in the process. And I know it's tricky. You have to take risks to win. You can't have your cake and eat it too. I get it. But that's the fan in me.
And there's just and this is just a sports thing in general. It's like guys aren't winners until they are.
Yeah.
Right. Like Mitch Marner was considered part of the choking core in Toronto that just lost every year. And now if the playoffs ended right now, he'd probably be the Conn Smythe winner. He's been awesome for Vegas. And it's like, I don't know, geez, he doesn't look like much of a loser right about now. And there's a case of a team that did go top of market and spent all the money in the world on a guy that I remember we debated, should the Bruins really be willing to, if Mitch Marner was even an option, should they even give him that? And it's I don't know what that's going to look like 5 or 6 years from now, but right now it's paying off for Vegas. Carolina went top of the free agent market to get Nick Ehlers, who I think has been pretty good for them for the most part. Is he worth his contract? I don't know. Maybe ultimately not. Who knows? Let's see what happens. But he's been good so far. Montreal, who was one of the top trade targets last summer, was Noah Dobson. Islanders probably weren't going to be able to keep him. Montreal gives up 2 first-round picks for him, and he's a huge part of why they're where they are now. So, that there are also examples of sometimes when you go top of market, it just turns out you actually just got yourself a really good player, and it does help you.
Yeah, sometimes Xbox GMing does work out. I will say, Scott, one thing that I've thought of, and we'll get going here soon because you've given me enough of your time, but the whole thing about McAvoy and Pasternak's prime, without sacrificing too much of the future, but within reason, I look at the 2028 draft, and the Bruins have 3 first-rounders, and maybe Toronto ends up sucking and Florida ends up sucking, and those are high picks. Or maybe they're middle picks in the first round, or maybe they're worse. But I look at those picks, and you're 2 years away from even selecting those players. And I would say 3 to 5 years away from those players being rookies, if they even panned out. And now you're talking about players that are on your team, but McAvoy and Pastrnak are now in their mid-30s legit. Those are futures, along with, a roster player here or a prospect there for sure. Like, I think those are some assets that you could be shipping away now, because those will not hurt. Those will never impact the McAvoy Pastrnak prime window. It's a timing thing. So can you hold on to your current prospects and maybe your 26th first round pick, but can you float out those picks where it's like they're futures, but they're futures? Like, that to me is kind of the sweet spot this summer. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, if there's a trade where you can include one or two of those 2028s, like, those should absolutely be on the table. I do worry that, like, teams, depending on where they are, like, might be hesitant to take picks that far out to really value. Like, that might not have much value until maybe this trade deadline, right? Where, like, you see picks move at the deadline that are a year out from the upcoming draft, but moving them over the summer, 2 years away, like, you just don't see it as much. Not saying it's impossible, but it would depend on the team and, like, what they're looking for, because no one really likes to admit that they're in a longer term rebuild. So there's a lot of teams that probably feel like they're where the Bruins are, and they're like, we're gonna quickly retool, and they probably look at 2028 the same way, and they're like, no, we want a 26 or a 27.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, fair. I mean, you would have to probably give them something of modern value too, like. But you mentioned like Ronek earlier. It's like, could you package a couple of futures and Lohrei and Patra for like Elias Pettersson and Philip Ronek? Like, could now that maybe that's a massive. I know a lot of Bruins fans want nothing to do with Elias Pettersson, and I'm not even saying to go for it, but like something.
I
like
might
that.
be one of them, by the way. Like,
Yeah.
When Elias Pettersson was at his best, I loved him as a player. Like, I
He's
just think
not far removed from 80 points, 100 points, a couple years away.
He did so many things well. I'm just so scared. I'm like, what has happened? Like, I know Vancouver overall has just gone downhill, but like his decline started even before the whole team bottomed out, and it really worries me. Like, if he can't get back to that, and you're stuck with that contract and 11 million a year, whatever it is, like, I mean, it's like a borderline franchise killer. Like, there's just nothing you can do at that point.
Yeah, no, I'm hesitant on him too, but moves like that, like that's the type of stuff that could be out there where you're not totally giving up on your current prospects, major prospects. Anyway, Scott, thank you for your time. I know where to find you. Where can everybody find you writing?
On WEEI.com. Hopefully going to start to be doing a little bit more of it looking ahead towards the off season here. Yeah, Twitter handles on screen here on YouTube at McLaughlin9. And then, yeah, little thing called the Skate Podcast.
I heard that's a good one. And then for those listening on Friday, which is when this is being released, you are on the radio on Monday, Memorial Day.
I'm on Sunday and Monday. I got Sunday 8 to 10 a.m. So Justin Turpin and I are doing that every week all through the summer. And then I will also be on Monday noon to 4 p.m.
Got it. Awesome. Well, I'll be listening. I hope you have a good Memorial Day weekend. You'll be busy, obviously, but otherwise, what would you be doing?
I didn't even mention this on the skate pod, but highlight of the entire offseason for me, Sunday night, I want to see Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, where's that?
At the Garden.
Oh, nice.
Hopefully he performs better there than the Bruins and Celtics.
Could you imagine? Yeah, I know, right? That's the House of Horrors lately. Could you imagine the acoustics if he was at Songus, right down the street from you?
Oh,
oof, come on now.
Yeah. I saw Springsteen on Broadway when he did his solo shows there. So that was in like a 500 seat venue. That was pretty amazing.
Well, have fun with that, Scott. I know you're a big Springsteen guy. Have a good Memorial Day weekend. To all you listening, have a very happy and safe and responsible Memorial Day weekend out there, and I'll talk to you next week.